Oh, sorry. Sorry, Billy. Let me start over.
Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Emily Ford. I'm the ACRL Oregon president, and I'm also a librarian at Portland State University here in Portland, Oregon. We are gathered here today with Aaron Roussel and also Billy is also here from the ACRL Oregon board, and we have other folks from the ACRL Oregon board in the audience with us. Billy is helping run the Zoom. And I'm going to be doing some of the questions and things, the moderation. So we're here to hear from Aaron Roussel about academic freedom in libraries. Aaron is an associate professor of sociology at PSU, Portland State. His research and teaching projects focus on race, class, and social danger through quantitative and ethnographic methods, specifically with respect to policing, state violence, and drugs. He's the co-author of The Limits of Community Policing, Civilian Power and Police Accountability in Black and Brown Los Angeles. It's an NYU Press title from 2019. So good for your libraries to purchase. Aaron joined his first union, UAW 2865, in 2007 and has served in academic unions for a variety of roles, including shop steward, vice president for academic freedom and grievances, and executive counselor at Portland State University American Association of University Professors. He continues to organize in a variety of ways in his various communities. So Aaron knows a lot about academic freedom and is going to share with us today. We have a game plan, and that is that Aaron will be presenting for about half an hour. And during that time, if you have questions, pop them into the chat, and we'll try and get them answered either by Aaron or by myself or others to chime in. To get those questions answered. And then after about half an hour of presentation, we'll be going into breakout rooms. And when we go into breakout rooms, we'll stop recording. So Aaron's presentation is recorded, but the breakout rooms obviously will not be. And then the discussion, when we come back together for about another 10, 15 minutes, that will not be recorded, so that you feel free to have discussion and report back in a more safe environment for you. So welcome everybody, and I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, and please, use the chat in addition for questions, also like reactions and discussion, and I'll be monitoring that as well.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Billy, for running the stuff behind the scenes. Nice to be here with you all. Mostly I see blank screens, but that's I guess to be expected. I think by law, I'm now required to say how awkward it is to be doing this over Zoom. It is. And I also want to say that we're going to go over some stuff today. I'll give you a little outline in a second. Actually, I guess we should do it now. Boom. And any of this stuff could easily take an hour or more by itself, right? Whole books have been written about some of this stuff. So my goal today is to kind of give you an overview of the concerns, kind of where we're at. What does the playing field look like? And then, how do we respond, right? How do we collectively and individually protect ourselves and also advance the intellectual causes we're interested in, right? So I guess let's go ahead and start off with the academic freedom part. AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, which is both a labor union and an advocacy group. So in some places it's in some places it's a union, in all places it's an advocacy group. They tend to be the people that we most closely associate with academic freedom. And this is their definition, right? The freedom of a teacher or researcher in higher education to invest and discuss the issues in their academic field, to teach or publish findings without interference from political figures, board of trustees, donors, and other entities. Academic freedom protects the rights of the faculty member to speak freely when participating in institutional governance, which I think is a really important part that we often forget, right? As well as speak freely as a citizen with sort of gestures at free speech, which we'll talk about. There's a lot of stuff kind of packed in here, right? Teaching and research, right? What is it I can say to my classroom? What is it that I'm free to investigate as a researcher? both very different fields of contestation and fields of different players and different actors and reactors, right? The notion of interference from political figures we're seeing play out with respect to Florida and some other places. Boards of trustees, right? These folks shape the contours of the university in some very subtle but powerful ways, right? Our program's funded, our program's cut. PSU right now is going through a round of reductions, right? What will remain? That is the ability to fund certain things while not directly and technically speech, right? Does kind of shape who is going to be at a university, right? And who is going to be heard and how. And then this notion of the faculty member, right? Do adjunct faculty have the same kind of freedoms? In theory, in practice, right? I think all of these things come to bear, right? So they also unpack all of these things. Teaching, what is teaching? All relevant matters in the classroom. Keyword here is relevant, right? Research, explore all avenues of scholarship, research, creative expression. So we cover the humanities here and some other things. Intramural speech, right? So the co-governance. What am I allowed to say to the institution itself? And how am I allowed to go about helping to craft some of those codes and rules and committees that come to address these concerns? And I think this here is very much where academic freedom lives and breathes, right? And then this, I think, is one of the key matters of concern, right? When speaking and writing as citizens, it's sort of this weird gesture to free speech. And as we'll see, I think there's some tension here. And those of us who work in the academy, right, I think are keenly aware of these interesting and strange lines that we have to walk. So, I think I first became attuned to this as academic freedom became used very much as a weapon, right? How do we use this thing in order to, in some ways, there are a variety of what we might call bad actors, right? At a university, my university is no exception, right? Portland State, who use, and some might say abuse, academic freedom, right? To make nakedly racist arguments, right? Or other kinds of not just defensive, but things that cut at our core of humanity, right? And ought this be protected by academic freedom? And the argument of many of us is no, it shouldn't, right? This is beyond the pale for a variety of reasons. As time has worn on, I think there's also the concept of defense, right? The movement against critical race theory, very cynical, very sort of nakedly political, right? How does this concept, how can we mobilize it? How can we use it as both shield and sword, right? And these are open questions. I ask these questions and I'm asking them of you because the answers really aren't clear and the answers aren't set down anywhere. They're things that we have to argue for. They're things that we have to craft coherent rhetoric around and then think deeply about what policy looks like and how we're going to enact that policy and who is going to enact that policy. One of the key things I think that we have to bear in mind, and the slippage is nearly constant when you're reading, particularly the comment section of any article, right? But even articles themselves in whatever news media, even the Chronicle of Higher Ed and Inside Higher Ed and all those academic publications really slip across this line very often without really acknowledging it, right? Academic freedom is not free speech. These are two very different ideas. Free speech, and if volumes have been written about academic freedom, libraries have been written about free speech, right? It is a thing that is litigated endlessly. There are free speech cases before the court right now, the Supreme Court of the US, right? SCOTUS. And these things take on very particular characteristics, right? Time, place, manner. Can I enact a free speech zone on my campus where, free speech is only there for an hour a day at lunchtime on Wednesdays if you sign up in advance, right? Where is free speech in this, right? And the answer, of course, is that those things, the answer to those questions is through time, place, and manner, right? Is it disruptive to the university? Is the university a place where this is supposed to happen? Which times, et cetera, right? A lot of this has been litigated. A lot of policy has been crafted around it. And then, of course, the incitement to imminent lawless activity, the Brandenburg Standard, is really the cornerstone of the, is this regulable in other ways, right? So interestingly, for example, most internet speech doesn't count, right? You can make yay unto death threats, but because they're on the internet, they're sort of not taken seriously as speech, which, especially for those of us who put ourselves in the public eye and then reap all kinds of online harassment, right? It's good to be aware that that is in fact covered by free speech, a lot of it, right? Is that a good thing? We can argue about that, and I'm not sure that it is, but I do think the legal arguments become weak, right? Especially as the current architecture of free speech as it exists today, right? Many terrible things can be said under the contemporary free speech regime, and we're even seeing, the transfer of that power of speech into the hands of private authorities, right? So technically, free speech, of course, is only the freedom from government censorship, right? So Twitter, what is free speech there? What is free speech on Facebook? These things are less about free speech and more about the terms of service. When thinking about free speech and the limits thereof within the academy, right? We're mostly concerned with ideas and notions of fitness. These things are specific to your area of study, and probably they ought to be, right? I don't know that I want a bunch of physicists weighing in on the fitness of my capacity to teach the classes about the things about which I am expert, right? This hinges on the notion of the academy as experts, right? Expertise. So, and a lot of this, by the way, is I have drawn generously from Jennifer Ruth, from my colleagues' work on the subject. The idea that a historian who is a Holocaust denier is obviously unfit, right? And I think that this is pretty clear why that would be. Whereas an electrical engineer who is a Holocaust denier is just a crank, right? And just, because someone who is doing something so out of step, demonstrably unfit, right, for their area of study, because they of all people should know better, right? And because of the platform that you ascend when you teach and research about a particular subject, you have been adjudged an expert, right? And that expertise carries through the way to the university, right? Is why the university can weigh in on some of these things, right? I think the latter clause here, an electrical engineer who's a Holocaust denier is just a crank, I appreciate the point, right? The point, of course, is that you can be wrong about things that you don't directly study, as long as you're not pretending to be an expert about them. Now, does that extend into the general realm of fitness for teaching as a profession, as a general set of rules that we should follow? I think that's where that clause becomes problematic, right? And that's something that maybe is an angle for attack, an angle for us to sink our hooks into and to think about, right? But I think the difference hopefully is clear. And I want to highlight an irony here, right? That you actually, as academics, have more freedom, weirdly enough, to say wackadoo stuff when you're speaking as a non-expert. It's when you ascend to that platform as expert. I can say, because of my expertise in this thing, right, that this wackadoo nonsense is real, right? That's when you kind of cross over that line, right? I hope that makes sense. That is a line that AAUP has been kind of flirting with a little bit, but a lot of the contemporary commentators on the subject are beginning to pay much more attention to. One of the things I want us to really think about as we kind of contemplate this notion, right, is the notion of academic freedom as academic responsibility. We talk so very much about freedom, but we really don't focus on the responsibility aspect of this, right? who is the university to tell me what I can and can't say, all these kind of things. Well, the notion is that it's a collection of experts, right? We are all experts in some sort of discipline where however porous those boundaries are, there are some boundaries, right? Again, the Holocaust denier example is a good one, right? We don't want someone like that teaching history, right? Whether or not they should be teaching electrical engineering is a question that we can wrestle with. I think we should wrestle with. But I think the first thing is very clear, right? We're constantly adjudicating the worth of ideas and speech and concept. That really is what the university in some ways is supposed to be. We do this when we review papers. We do this when we write letters of recommendation. We do this when we write generally. Just, I mean, we convene in associations where we adjudge the worth of various ideas and giving out awards and everything else, right? This is so implicit to the project that it seems silly even sometimes to question this thing. And so the question becomes, what is the responsibility of us in so doing, right? If there are people who sort of take on, I mean, for lack of a better word, fascist sort of ideas in ways that are deeply counter to the way the discipline functions, right? That is something the discipline needs to deal with. The academy needs to deal with. And I would say that, not administration, but the academy itself, right? Your colleagues. Academic freedom, unlike free speech, right, is not codified whatsoever in law. There's no First Amendment for academic freedom. The AUP issues reports occasionally and sanctions people in universities for various things, right? But they're not even always consistent on this. And I don't mean to cast aspersions toward AUP. When I was teaching at the Washington State University in Pullman, a grad student and an adjunct and a professor had their syllabi appropriated by Fox News or whatever, and they were vilified on the news for not allowing people to say various slurs in class, right? And that was a bad thing for some reason. But AUP is basically just like, what, we don't support speech codes. So, that's kind of the end, right? They are a body of people that make decisions. We need to make sure that they make good decisions, which is what I'm trying to get at. So where's the teeth in all this? Where does the power to adjudicate academic freedom lie? In some ways, it's academic norms and values, right? These are things that we live and practice, which means we need to be aware and attuned to them, right? Those things are not, they're enforceable insofar as all informal social control is enforceable, right? That's not very satisfying. So we also have faculty codes that in theory are supposed to regulate behavior, right? Faculty code of conduct, professional standards of conduct, these kinds of things. And these things do contain teeth about respect for one's colleagues, respect for knowledge, these kind of things. But I think this is maybe the biggest one, right? Is the university co-governance apparatus is, faculty senate, various unions, right? This is where we as academics need to be able to be clear and direct, I think, in how we choose to adjudicate things like academic freedom. This is where, when you're defining, for example, if there were to be a court case, right, what the academic milieu is in which you exercise your academic freedoms, right? The faculty co-governance apparatus is the complex in which you're exercising that, right? That's relevant to the case. That's relevant to the context, right? As well as the fact that these are the folks that we ought to be turning to anyway, right? Because they're us. If there is discipline, if there's questions about fitness and questions about what that means in a particular disciplinary case, things like this, I want my colleagues to make that decision. I don't want admin to make that decision. I don't want the state legislature to make that decision. I want my colleagues to do it, personally. Collective movements, I think we often both overemphasize and underemphasize the power of collective movement, right? It's this vast force that is doing a thing that is sometimes undefinable, right? But it's also a way to collectively affect a narrative about what is actually happening in the world. So moving collectively, and we'll talk about like the ways that happens and moves and changes. And so I think it's really important to figure out where all of this lies at your campus, right? We're not, right now at my campus trying to figure out if there's going to be a committee that's going to do some reviewing of some of these concerns. Who will staff that committee, right? We started doing this last year. It was a group of union representatives, a group of faculty senate representatives, several different unions were represented. And this year, a admin committee maybe has begun to do something similar, and it's staffed mostly by admin folks. That raises my eyebrows some, right? So we're maybe going to have to contest where that authority lies and who ought to be doing that kind of rulemaking and reviewing of various things. I hope that makes sense. I'll give you an example. So the African American Policy Forum, as soon as the attacks on critical race theory began, they said, okay, listen, we want to codify protection for faculty who teach critical concepts. So what we're going to do is we're going to push various faculty senate groups around the country to adopt some version of this resolution supporting those things. It's been very successful so far. And again, my colleague Jennifer Ruth is behind a lot of this work, along with Kimberly Crenshaw and a few other folks. Article by Schrecker this year says 39 schools have done so. I talked to Jennifer this morning. She said that 50 schools have now signed on. This is a powerful thing, right? It's actually getting written up in the news. It looks like a powerful, I mean, speaking of movements, right? It looks like a powerful force, a counter tidal wave, right? It's helpful for a variety of reasons. It is a political response to legislatures. Some people, I think, are afraid of it for those reasons. But I think it's very useful not to have a single voice defining the narrative, right? We need to reframe these debates in ways that people can understand so we can get their support. I mean, it is a political question in many ways. As much as I think a lot of us shy away from politics, I don't know that we can, right? I think as we've learned over the past few decades, the personal is political and the academic is political too. These things also provide legal and, like I said, legal and political cover for professors who get accused of various things, right? If in fact something like this should end up in a termination, which would then end up in a court case, or maybe a tenure hearing that didn't go the way someone wanted it to for a very pointed and particular reason, right? The context matters. The norms that surrounded the individual as they were conducting their work, that becomes legally relevant, right? So having these updated and strengthened faculty resolutions regarding various things, it's a really powerful tool for protecting people in sort of the long term as well. I hope that makes sense. And of course, it demonstrates solidarity, right? It means that if something happens to one of us, all of us are going to speak up about it and put pressure on various actors causing the harm to uncause the harm or whatever needs to be done, right? The more we're aware of this, the more that solidarity can take physical form. So I want to explain the playing field a little bit. I don't want to oversell this, but I don't want to undersell this either. As academics, I think oftentimes we are somewhat naive about the strength of argument and the good faith of argument. We are engaged in debates almost because that's what academia is, a series of debates, right? And so we take debates seriously. We write papers about it. We do it in presentations. We do it on panels, right? And we trust many times. Science is often a good faith endeavor, right? We're scandalized when articles get retracted for having faked data, right? As we should, because for the most part, we trust one another to do good and solid work. This is not what this is about. There is a great deal of bad faith engagement out there, right? Some of it is cynical. Some of it is from those who feel aggrieved. As someone once said, when I'm gonna mess this up, but when you've been in a position of privilege, right, equality feels like a demotion, And so a lot of those people are really cranky about that right now. Some of it is cynical and funded. And some of it is stuff that looks at the way that world is going and says, listen, I can make money off of this, right? I'm not funded by Coke, but I can use this to grift around and make a living out of this, right? So there's a lot of this going on. And I want to sketch this out. There are incredibly moneyed interests that are deeply invested in this and have been invested in this for many decades. We are seeing the fruit of a lot of these labors now. They seed ideas through all kinds of outlets, through the academic outlets, through think tank outlets, through policy outlets, and those things pop up kind of at the discernible level in the media, right? And in you hear your cranky uncle who watches Fox News too much recycling debate points that you heard somewhere else, and you're like, where did you get that from, right? Well, you got it from Fox News or wherever else, right? But it's not an organic thought on behalf of this person, right? Yeah, okay. And then there's a bunch of people that use this discourse to sort of self-monetize, right? I don't want to discourage people from debating, but I do want us to be critical about the purpose of debate. Bad faith actors use public forums to platform bad ideas. I'm reminded of a particular instance, right, where James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian went on Mark Hill's show. Is that right? I think that's right. And say some nonsense about critical race theory. And of course, the host is actually trained in this stuff and proceeds to tear them apart, right? That's not, unfortunately, the end. The segment cuts off, right? It's a clear loss, I guess, for the bad faith actors because they haven't won the debate. But what they've done is introduce people to the ideas, right? They are going on someone else's talk show the next day to say the same thing. There's no outcome to the debate, right? It's without substance. It's used simply to platform the ideas in general. Oftentimes you'll see panels where every single person on there is funded by Heritage Foundation, Liberty Institute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And what they've done is they've managed to elevate some concern to national prominence and then split hairs over tiny differences in policy, right? How is it that we should have public or private school vouchers? How should that policy be applied, right? And so suddenly we're staring down a very narrow piece when what we should be asking, of course, what is the history of this? Why is this so incredibly racist? Where does this come from? And that's not really the conversation that we're having, right? The conversation that we're having is being very scripted and very narrow. And even, like I said about the Boghossian and Lindsay thing, right? Even intellectual defeats spread the ideas, right? Again, it's not to say don't debate things, but it is to say know what you're walking into, right? And I just wanted to kind of show you what this looks like. One of my academic colleagues, Isaac Kamola, has done a great deal of research on this. Ralph Wilson and Kamola, you think about the thing as the stuff that's really under the surface that you don't see until finally you get to the level of like Twitter, where everything's visible, right? What are the steps that kind of get us there? What is the network, what they refer to as the coctopus? You have all of these well-heeled corporate donors and interests that sit down at a table. They don't all agree on everything, right? And sometimes they split off and form a different organization that funds a different set of groups, right? But they actually do often talk all the time about what their political strategy is. And Charles Koch is really the mastermind behind a lot of this, but he's not the first, he's not the only, right? All of these organizations listed down here are deep pocket organizations interested in funding things like these organizations, which fund oftentimes, sometimes respectable research, right? But they also have a particular agenda, and they need to keep one foot in sort of the respectable world and one foot in the world where they're able to push a particular agenda along, right? Chris Rufo, the guy who really originated the attacks on CRT, for example, started at the Discovery Institute, arguing for intelligent design, right? Then transfers over, I think, to Heritage and Cato, and I've lost track where he is now. But at the end of the day, the goal of these things is to push a particular deregulatory line to enable the people that are funding this to basically maintain the income inequality and the other kinds of wealth inequality that produce the ability to control politics in such a fashion, right? You know, these organizations are the policy and legal organizations. They're the ones that do the dirty work. They get the work done. FIRE, for example, in the middle, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, extremely interested in the ability of all professors to say whatever the hell they want at any time, anywhere, right? And that means that sometimes they end up defending people that you're like, oh, okay, that seems reasonable, right? But they are uniformly the ones who will step in also on behalf of the extreme radical right. And this is their purpose. And if you look at who's on the board of directors and where their funding comes from, this is the reason they exist. You keep the other pieces of it for legitimacy purposes, right? I think a lot of us are familiar with ALEC, which manufactures, you know, legislation for the state level and for the federal level in order to, you know, get uniform policy across various governmental bodies, right? There are a variety of campus groups that are funded to be on your and my campus to generate controversy. This is the point of them. This is the goal of them. They're very well heeled. We had a Turning Point USA chapter on our campus for a long time. And I kind of mixed up a few here. I think New Discourses and some of the other ones, Counterweight, for example, they're not necessarily on campus. They're more like academic light kind of organizations. You know, but these are the folks that either share staff with, or then the controversies that ensue end up being written about and platformed on campus reform, Quillette, the post-millennial, right? Professor Watchlist, which you know, kudos to you if you're on it. You know, because they generate 100 stories, right? 1,000 stories, so many stories, too many to keep track of, really. Although that's what Isaac Kamola's group does. But those, the ones that are the most provocative, right? Make it up the ladder, the next chain, to the Fox network, the Sinclair network, right? The One American News, all the ones that are going to be in lots of people's homes, right? And from there, that's where the consequences start to take hold, right? That's where you start to see the real world changes that take place, right? The threats to people's jobs, the desire to abolish, for example, gender studies as a curriculum, right? Which happened in Hungary. The constriction or the enhancement of funding lines, what shall be studied and how, right? You know, to the ultimate extent that the more you put out poison in the world, the more people are going to act on it in a way that it's unpredictable. And that's what the stochastic terrorism means, right? Again, you know, in Portland recently, we had a mass shooting where some angry right winger pulls out a gun and just starts shooting at a march, right? It's not a predictable thing in that moment, but it is a predictable thing in general. That's what this is. That's the point of all of this, right? Hope that makes sense. This is I drew all this. I hope it makes some amount of sense.
Hey, Aaron, sorry.
Yes.
We're at 12:35, so I don't know if you, I know.
All right. A lot of good folks. Your colleagues are great, some of them. There are some organizations that can help. Faculty First Responders is run by Isaac Kamola. And he sends everybody who gets a terrible email or a terrible news story, sorry, written about them because of something they said on the internet, this form letter saying, listen, there's help available. We're going to give you some help. We're going to help you reframe the narrative, et cetera, et cetera. There are some ambiguous actors out there, y'all. University admin is not necessarily your friend. There be dragons here. And if you give away too much power to them, you may not get it back, right? Unions are blank slates, right? They're a collection of people doing things. So we're academic associations. We need to be the ones pushing the envelope on a lot of this stuff. Our colleagues are great, some of them are terrible. We need to make sure that we're being careful as to who we're trying to build bridges with and how we're going to build those bridges, right? I'll talk about that if you want. Last things that I want to make sure that you all are aware of. Online security practices, individual level stuff you can do to protect yourself. If you're at a public university, everything you write at an edu address is going to be discoverable by public records requests. So Get another email address. I am so deadly serious about this. Get a Gmail address, get something else, get something that's going to require a subpoena to get that information, right? What is it that you want read back to you in official setting? Put that in your email, in your university email, right? If you're going to be active on social media, make sure that you're separating your personal and professional accounts, and that your personal accounts, if you're going to say some wackadoo, like if you're going to say some controversial stuff, right? Remove your identifying information, right? Make sure it's not easy to be like, that person's that person, right? Google yourself frequently, figure out what the world thinks about you, so you know. You can use delete me, and I'll show you that in a bit. It'll be on the resources slide. To request removal of yourself from major data info databases, which have your address and your phone number and the number of kids you have and your parents' address, and all that stuff's out there. Your name's out there. It's all out there. Best thing to do, get to know your office staff. If your information gets out there in the hatosphere, the people who will be fielding those phone calls and doing you a favor or not are the people who answer the phones. When I was doxxed, the people that made my life lovely and helpful were the ones who said, "Oh, you want to talk to Aaron? Sure," and puts the phone just on the desk and keeps typing until they get bored and hang up, right? They're my friends. They make my life better. You go to those folks, organize, push people to do appropriate action. Practice collective care labor. If someone you know is targeted, make them dinner. Reach out to them and offer to check their email for the awful things that are going to come through there. See how you can make their life better, because they're undergoing a intense amount of shit that comes their way. Make sure that you can be, and a group of people, so you don't exhaust yourself, can help make that a livable experience for them. And then, of course, we got to tailor specific strategies for specific threats, consider multiple tactical options. Not everything requires an open letter. Open letters can backfire. Media responses can backfire. What's the problem? What's the solution we want out of this? And how do we get there? Strategy and tactic. And I'll just end with this. When you are most successful, in some cases, it's a little anticlimactic because it means nothing happened. We had an Atlantic reporter digging into the Peter Boghossian thing here on PSU's campus. He made it clear he was going to use public records requests to get all kinds of things. He sent a blanket email to everybody on campus and said, "Please talk to me." And a bunch of us got together and emailed the Atlantic and said, "Listen, guys, this isn't the person you want doing this work. We're preparing ways to respond." But we had a line to the editor. We said, "Here, listen, you need to think about this." They said, "We'll think about it." We heard nothing else, but the story never came out. We, I think, succeeded in that moment. It's a tough thing to hang your hat on, but because nothing happened, I think that was a victory. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you all. I have all these many thanks for many people who helped me develop and hone these ideas. I'm more than happy to talk about any and all of them. And here's a bunch of resources that can help you navigate the things. I'm going to shut up because I've apparently been going on for way too long and turn it back over to Emily.
Sure. Aaron, can you, let's see, it's 12:40, so we have 20 minutes. I know we could do, we are going to share the slides. Yeah, we've already talked about that. We'll send it out with the recording.
Good.
If we
I'm
want
going
to
to end the recording now, if that's
Thank you,
okay.
Billy. That's
Yeah.
a good idea.
Thank you, Billy.